Welcome to Unlocking Your Truth, another podcast by Dr. Lesley Phillips.
Hello, listeners. You're tuning in to Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Lesley and Corey. And we are broadcasting on 101.7 FM across the Fraser Valley from the unceded territory of the Stolo Nation. Unlocking Your Truth is a talk show about metaphysics and spirituality. And every week we do our best to inspire you and to educate you under that general umbrella. And some weeks we have a guest on the show who helps us to bring inspiring information to you. And today is no exception. We do have a guest on the show this evening, and she's going to be talking to us about how to heal from trauma at any stage of life. So even if your problems and your issues seem insurmountable, she's here to deliver the message that, not to lose hope because you can heal yourself. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Sandra. She is a traumatic incident reduction facilitator, a certified trauma coach. She's also trained in energy healing, and she owns a holistic business called Rise Above Your Story, and it focuses on transformational trauma healing. Her passion is to really help people to heal their trauma, and it came out of her own healing process to heal her own traumatic past. So Sandra was molested as a child, and she was sexually assaulted and raped as a young adult. And so you can imagine that that's deeply traumatic experiences. And for many years, she felt lost until she found her purpose and peace through spirituality. And so she went on a journey where she studied different healing modalities, and until she was able to transform her own emotional pain. And in doing that work on herself, she began to understand trauma and the effect it has on the body and behavior and really the whole of a person's life. And eventually the work that she did on herself and the understanding that she came to led her to apply that wisdom to help other people. So welcome to the show, Sandra.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. We're going to be talking about some difficult stuff, but thank you for being on the show, because I think that your story in some senses is not unusual, that sexual abuse is something that is very prevalent in our society, more prevalent than maybe people know. Maybe we can begin by delving into your past, and if you would be prepared to share some information about the trauma that you lived through, in the hope that it might help some of our listeners who are also survivors of those kinds of traumatic events.
Sure. When I was 12 years old, my parents could fulfill a childhood dream for me. They made it possible for me to take care of a pony. Now, we didn't have the means for me to get riding lessons or even have my own horse, but they made it possible so I could be around horses. And it was one of my mother's friends. She had a stable, and she had a little pony that she didn't have time to care for that much. And so she offered that I could take care of it a few times a week. And I was more than happy to oblige. As a 12-year-old, horses, That's like a dream come true. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed everything about the stable, taking care of the pony and being around the big horses, dreaming of one day having my own. And there was the stable master. He was an older man in the 60s, and he promised my mom to take good care of me, making sure he shows me how everything works, that I don't get bitten while cleaning the horse and all those things. And I was trusting him. I mean, I had no reason not to. And one day he asked me if I would like to take a ride on his big horse. And of course, I loved it. So I said yes. So the next time we went on a ride, I was sitting on the horse and he was guiding it. And we were walking along meadows and fences, and everything looked beautiful, peaceful. I enjoyed it, being up there on a horse. And after a few minutes of walking, he stopped the horse in front of a shed. And he said he had to go inside and get something, and he wanted to give the horse a little rest. So I had no reason to doubt that. So he asked me to go inside, and he asked me to sit down on a makeshift bed, and he was rummaging around on the other side. And later he came over to me and sat down next to me. Now, without going too much into detail, he molested me that day.
Right.
And I didn't know what to do with that. I was 12. I was playing with Barbies. I had no idea what he was doing. I just knew I didn't like it.
Yeah.
And coming home that day, I didn't want to tell my parents because I was afraid that I did something wrong because it felt so wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So, but a friend of mine who came over, who I luckily told, said, you have to tell your parents and I'll go with you if you're afraid, but you have to tell them. So he came with me. My mom came home and I told her. And she looked at me and it was almost emotionless. Like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. And she said, don't go there anymore. That was the only thing I heard from her. Now, back then, I felt like I wasn't helped by her. Today, I understand that she simply was horrified of what she heard. She didn't know what to do with that information. So all she could do at that point was get me out of that situation that she put me in her point of view. So she probably felt guilty for getting me in that situation, which was not her fault.
But I also, I mean, I think it's fairly common for parents in a way to be dismissive of these things. And sometimes I think it's because they have their own story that they haven't dealt with. And so in order for them to deal with something that their child goes through, they have to deal with what they went through. And often they're not ready or prepared to do that.
That is true. Another aspect is that they simply cannot believe what happened. Let's say it was the own father, a grandfather, an uncle, an aunt. They would say, I don't believe you, because they cannot get it in their mind that that person would do something like that to their child. And just the words, I don't believe you, even though if parents change their mind after and really get down to it after they had time to think, it can cause so much damage.
Yes, the damage has already been done. Now, in a minute, I want you to continue with your story, but I had a comment and a question, because I read on your website you've shared your story quite extensively, and the event that you just shared isn't the only event. But in reading all of the different events that happened to you, there were differing degrees of the level of assault. You know, sort of what we might call almost like minor molestation to full-on rape. And I thought it might be useful to talk about what defines a sexual assault, because, you know, and maybe I can share some of, you know, I used to learn the clarinet when I was a kid. Well, my clarinet teacher used to beat time on my thigh, a bit too high up on my thigh, you know. I was 9 years old. And so that is a form of molestation and sexual assault on the minor end of the scale, isn't it? So I wonder if you could just talk to that a little bit, because I think, and especially, I mean, I think it's getting easier for people with the Me Too movement, and maybe the younger people today would recognize it and not be so afraid of authority, or maybe not. But I think there's just so much that happens that's never even called what it is.
Right. Well, in essence, sexual assault is the moment when some touch makes you feel uncomfortable,
Right.
and you ask the person to stop, and that person does not. He does not respect your boundaries.
What if you're a child, like you were, and like I was in the example I shared, and you're afraid of authority figures? You don't even understand that it is an assault. You feel uncomfortable, but you kind of think, well, that's the adult, and I must be wrong for feeling uncomfortable, because then you're incapable of setting a boundary, and yet it's still a molestation, isn't it?
That's very true. It's
Yeah.
still molestation, even though we don't understand it.
Yeah.
We will understand it at some point, and it's still the same.
Yeah. All right. So maybe you can share a bit more of your story, if you want to. Just what you think might help people to.
Okay. Well, one of the minor incidences of sexual assault was when I was 14. My parents and I went to Austria every year. I'm originally from Germany, so Austria was just around the corner.
Yes.
And we were always in the same hotel. It was like a family-run hotel, and the owner of the hotel was known to like to have welcome drinks with the guests, and liked to touch the breasts of the women. Only that, nothing else, just touching, and that was it. So, and people usually brush it off as he's drunk and he's funny. No. He had built a new restaurant, and he wanted to show my parents what he was doing, since we were basically family for going there for decades, and my grandparents before. So he asked his son to take my parents to the new buildings, and my parents asked him to watch over us until they're back. Well, he was actually trying to touch my breasts, and I was 14. I may have been young, but not naive. So I was telling him, no, don't. He didn't care. He just came after me. He kept chasing me for half an hour until my parents came back, trying to touch my breasts. And I didn't want that. And I couldn't believe that he wouldn't leave me alone after me saying no.
Yeah.
Like over and over again. So even though he did not touch me, his intentions were still sexual assault.
Yeah. I have a similar, we had a family doctor when I was growing up, and he also was the doctor of the place where my mother worked. And I went to that doctor with a flu. And I can't remember how old I was, but let's say about 16, maybe 15, 16, at the time when, you've grown breasts. And he said, well, it's necessary that we examine your breasts. And he again, the authority figure, trusted family doctor. Okay, it doesn't really make sense to me. Why do you need to examine my breasts when I'm here with like a cold? And again, I allowed him to do it. And because he's a doctor, he must know what's the appropriate examination here. And then I found out years later that, and similar to your story, because I remember you saying in your story, well, all of the holiday makers knew this about him and just used to laugh it off. Oh, well, that's him. He just touches people's breasts. And it was the same thing with this doctor, that all the women in the factory where he was the doctor for, that's what he would do. He would examine people's breasts at the slightest excuse. So, it's pretty prevalent.
It's a lot in the upbringing, because we were brought up to believe that adults know best. We have to obey adults, and we're the ones who do things wrong or misunderstand things. Adults are always right.
Yeah.
And
it wasn't, I don't know how old you are, but I think at the time when I was growing up, those kinds of things weren't even recognized. You know, they were made fun of, they were laughed off. And so, you know, and I'm sure that a lot of the people listening have got their own version of that, of these stories.
Right.
I mean, you know, I know that I've shared anecdotes with friends of mine, and it's very prevalent. So I think what we'll do now, Sandra, is we'll go to a break, but maybe after the break we'll start talking about how to handle this. And of course, we just got shared, you know, on one end of the scale, but I know you were actually raped. And again, I feel like, just from my own knowledge of friends of mine growing up, lots of them have got rape stories. And so it's a very, what's the word? It's just throughout our society. All right, so listeners, you're listening to Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Lesley, and my guest today, who's Sandra Cooze. And she's an expert in really releasing trauma, and especially sexual abuse and trauma. And so when we come back after the break, we're going to talk to Sandra about how we can heal ourselves from these experiences. Welcome back, listeners. You're tuning in to Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Lesley and with Sandra Cooze, who is an expert in helping people release trauma from their past. And in particular, we're talking about sexual abuse. And so I wanted to move into what we can do about it, but I think maybe before that, you know, because it can leave people feeling very broken, can't it? And I know that you reached a place that was very broken as a result of what you went through. Yes. And then you started to pick up the pieces and find a way through that. So how did you heal yourself?
Well, it was actually a very spiritual way of doing that. My lowest point I reached after I was raped, and a couple of years after, I went to see a psychologist because I didn't like the person I had become.
Mm. I was and what were you like? What happened to your personality?
I had completely secluded myself. I had gained weight to protect myself. So basically, I gained weight, and men left me alone. Which is also the last thing I still struggle on my healing journey, is getting rid of all that weight that don't need anymore. And I was just afraid of everything and everyone. I didn't go out anymore. I made myself invisible.
Yeah.
Just because I was afraid of getting attacked again. Because even if I just went out with friends at night to go dancing, there was some guy who was dancing with me and held me so close that I could really feel his private parts against mine. And at some point I was like, this can't be happening over and over again. I'm done.
Yeah.
And so I completely secluded myself, but I realized that this was not the way to go because I was not happy.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what happiness felt like anymore because I was so suppressing everything.
Right.
So I said, enough is enough. I went to see a psychologist and told him everything that happened. And he actually said, I think you already worked through it all. What am I supposed to do? So he basically brushed me off and all my trauma, my reaching out for help. And I was like, great, another man who just let me down.
Yeah.
So, well, my faith in men was kind of restored when a friend of mine back then, who was very spiritual, stood up in front of me, his hands on his hips, and said, get a quartz crystal already. And back then, I had no idea what that meant. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was telling me to get a piece of rock, and that should somehow make me feel better. But I did what he asked and got a quartz crystal. I still have it. this one.
Mm-hmm.
And he suggested that I take it to bed with me every night and meditate. Now, of course, I didn't know what meditation meant. I had never heard of spirituality or anything remotely. So, but I took his advice and just had it in my hand when I went to sleep, and I just relaxed. That's the extent of knowledge I had for meditation. And it took about 2 to 3 nights, and then I started feeling a tingle in my hands where I held the crystal. And then I started heat, and I started feeling like a pulsing of what I now know as energy.
Right.
And this was at some point going throughout my whole body. So I was basically at that time opening up my body to receiving energy.
Right.
Which I didn't know back then, but now I do. And some mornings I woke up and I was feeling so much lighter, as if a weight had lifted off of my shoulders. And within about 3 months, I was a different person. I was by no means healed,
Right.
but I felt so much better. I was more outgoing.
There'd been a shift. The energy was moving. It wasn't stuck in fear anymore.
Exactly. There was definitely a change. And what I learned over the years was, because I had the crystal with me at night, everything that was being pulled out by the quartz crystal happened when I was sleeping. So I didn't have to work through it again.
Yes, yeah.
Which was very helpful.
Yeah.
And so this was the beginning of my healing journey and my introduction to spirituality.
Yeah, so it might be worth just explaining to the listeners, because crystals, 2 things. They can be used as energy amplifiers, but they also can be used to absorb energy. And so in this case, Sandra was asleep, and the crystal was taking her pain, absorbing her pain.
Yes,
so did you learn how to cleanse your crystal and clear the pain from the crystal?
I did.
And it sounds like it also sort of almost activated. Well, maybe it was just pulling it out and unblocking it and allowing the energies to flow naturally.
Well, the quartz crystal is also called the poor man's diamond, because the energetic value is just as high as the monetary value of a polished diamond. What the quartz crystal does is it pulls out the negative energy and replaces it with positive.
Okay.
So it's very interesting. So it's really doing an energy exchange for you.
Yeah, very good. And so one question I have as a follow-on to that is, because I would think it's really important for the person to really want to heal, want to shift, want to change, believe they can, and intend that they can.
Yes.
I mean, I think I don't want listeners to think in a way that it's like a magic wand that I just put a crystal under my pillow and I'm healed and I don't have to be involved in it at all. I mean, you can agree or disagree, but I think that all healing ultimately is self-healing. And so the crystal is kind of a tool, but you must have been ready and really wanted it to happen.
Yes, I most definitely did want to heal. I wanted to feel better. I wanted to be happy again.
Right.
That was really the main issue, being happy, because I felt like I wasn't at all. Right. So, but you're right. Yes, you have to be ready to heal. And the thing is, if you're not ready to heal from your trauma, your body will find ways to tell you that you have to work on that. Let's say you start having unexplained aches and pains everywhere.
Yes.
That is a sign for the body to say, here, this is trauma.
Yes.
Heal it. Or some people cry out for help in different ways. Some start cutting themselves. I had a friend who was cutting herself when she was a teenager, and I asked her, what was your reasoning? And she said, well, for a while, the pain from cutting was worse than the pain I felt inside.
Yeah. I had a question about because, I mean, you described different events through your life, really. I think was the first one around about the age of 12.
Yeah.
But there are people who are abused really, really young, maybe before they can speak, before they can really cognize and think in a linear way or a logical way. And in that case, the trauma it really is cellular. It's absolutely cellular. And so how does the age of the traumatic event, how does that change the healing process, or does it change the healing process? And how does it alter the way that trauma manifests in the adult? Because I can imagine that there is a difference between someone who's molested at 12 than someone who's molested at 2.
Yes. The thing is, the body remembers.
Right.
Even if the person doesn't, the body remembers. The mind remembers. It's a lot of times it doesn't come out until they're adults and realize they behave differently in certain situations and don't understand why.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say, for example, they feel agitated with their partner and don't get it. Like the partner did or said something and they just get triggered and they have no idea where this is coming from.
Yeah.
Trigger is a sign from previous trauma. And then this is why I love my work with traumatic incident reduction, because this can release the trauma even if you don't remember what it was. It will get you back there and release it. And then at some points, it is truly incredible what the mind can remember. We always say that you don't remember anything before the age of 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm.
That's not true.
No.
I have clients who remember being molested as a little child, as a baby, when someone was just curious, and
yes, and it's their opportunity to take a look at something that maybe exactly.
The body remembers and the mind remembers. At some point, it will come up.
Well, and you are spirit, and so you're a spirit, you're an eternal being. There's an aspect of your consciousness that's always fully aware of everything that's happening to you. And so, but I do also believe that there is such a thing as repressed memory, and that there are people who come into their adulthood, and my childhood was marvelous. It was wonderful. There was my parents were wonderful. Everything was wonderful, and that's not the truth.
And they get triggered.
Yeah, and they get triggered, and the origin of the trigger is abuse in childhood.
Right.
But they have created a story over the top of the story to protect themselves. And also, usually, I mean, just like you talked about your mom having difficulty dealing with it, I think very often the abuser will create a story to hide what's going on. And almost like the adults will also play into a false reality because nobody wants to admit it and nobody wants to deal with it.
Yes, they don't want it to be true.
Yeah, they don't want it to be true. And so then you have people with triggers and behaviors as an adult who don't have a memory of the abuse, and yet it's still there.
Yes.
So how do you work with somebody who doesn't consciously remember?
Well, it really depends on where they are in their life. If they say, I know there is something, I just don't know what it is, if they're really ready to look into it, then I suggest we do TIR, which is traumatic incident reduction, which walks them into the trauma. If they don't remember what happened, we do a specific type of TIR, which means we go through the emotions. Like when did you feel like that? And when again, and keep going backwards and backwards. And at some point they reach that point where they do remember.
Yeah.
And
because I always think, sometimes I'm in a situation with a client and I can see that there was sexual abuse, but I would never, ever say it to them.
Right.
It has to come from them.
Yes.
Because then they're ready. I think it can just be a I mean, you tell me, but quite damaging to say to somebody, well, I see that you were sexually abused as a child, when they, you know, it's not come forward within their own consciousness yet.
Right. And of course, they could sue you for malpractice if they don't want if they don't want to believe it.
Yes,
and put
exactly.
thoughts in my head.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you're right. It has to come from them, and when they're ready, it will. Now, some people, they just feel like they have like one curveball after another thrown at them, or everything goes wrong in their life, and they don't understand why. So then I do something called life transformation with them.
Right.
So we work on what is wrong, changing their mindset from negative to positive, slowly adjusting. And usually that's the point, if there really was extreme trauma, that it starts to surface piece by piece.
Piece, yeah.
Yes, then I may continue with trauma coaching, which is slowly easing them into the process of looking at themselves and their past and helping them through the emotions they're feeling. When they feel comfortable with that and want to continue, then I do TIR, because TIR is very intense, because you actually walk through the trauma over and over again until the emotions release from the trauma. Because the trauma itself is not what keeps us hostage, it's the emotion attached to what happened.
Exactly.
So
it's the emotional charge that's still in the energy field.
Exactly. The trauma is just a part of our story. Not more or less important than what we had for dinner last night, but it's the emotion. And that's what we have to release. And that's what I focus on solely.
Yes. And I think that we should go into a discussion about that emotional release in the next section of the show. In the meantime, I wanted to ask you about the story. And because so many people, everyone has a story. And so many people, and yet the story is about the past. But many people hold on to the story of the past and tell it over and over again. And in the telling of it over and over again, they're recreating it in every moment. Because in the now moment, in present time, it isn't happening. It's only happening if you keep telling the story. So I wondered what your perspective on that was. How people keep themselves locked into being a victim or some aspect of the story and keep it alive.
Well, the thing that people are afraid of most in trauma healing is not having to go through the story again, but who they are without it.
Right. Who they are without it.
Yes, that's what I'm most afraid of, because they don't know who they are anymore. The trauma is such a big part of themselves. So.
Yes, and then the current who I am, all my relationships are attached to the current who I am. So if I completely change the who I am, my relationships are going to change as well. And so it's like my entire life is going to shift, and that is very frightening.
Yes.
Very, very, very frightening for people.
But at the same time, it's so rewarding.
Yeah. Because then you find out who you really are.
Exactly.
at the core of your being. Let me ask you another question before we go to break. What's the purpose of trauma? What was the purpose for you creating a life where you lived through, well, you know what the answer is obvious to me, so that you could become a trauma coach. But maybe you could just, talk about the purpose of trauma in general in people's life. Why does it happen?
I've been thinking a lot about this, and also about me choosing to become a trauma coach. I think situations are being brought into our life to show us how strong we actually are.
Yeah.
Because we have no control over what a person does to us. To some extent, we may, as an adult, be able to fight it.
But as a child,
no.
Yeah.
No, and then understanding it, and then really moving past that this is strength. I admire anyone who says, I'm ready to heal my trauma, because this is a journey that will really take you up and down hills. It is not easy. It's not like nice gravel street. No, it's up and down hills and downs all the way. So it's not easy. But have the courage to say, okay, I'm going to look deep into myself and I'm going to pick out the things that are not good about it. I don't feel good about myself. Looking at the shadow self and embracing it and saying, I love you. You have gone through so much, but you've brought me so far. And then releasing that. That's courage. So, and I believe it's really, trauma is just one way of showing us what we're actually capable of becoming.
I believe you're right, because everything in this world is duality, isn't it? It's based on opposite. At one end, we've got fear, and when you've been traumatized, that's the polarity you go to. But on the other end is love, ultimately. But all of those other things, like realizing how powerful you are. Well, thank you so much. We're going to talk more about this after the break. And listeners, you're tuning into Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Lesley, and tonight's guest, Sandra Cooze, who is somebody who works with people to help them release trauma. Welcome back, listeners. You're tuning into Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Lesley and Sandra Cooze, and tonight we're having a discussion about basically sexual abuse, molestation, and the process for healing and moving from a sense of being a victim to feeling a sense of being empowered. And so we mentioned before the break that really the thing that keeps people locked into the pattern of being a victim or whatever behavior patterns they've got stuck in because they've been abused is the emotional energy. That the emotional energy has been trapped in their energy field, and that is the thing that's really, causing the issue. Because if there was extreme fear, because you were abused sexually as a child, and then your husband raises his voice, you might freeze in absolute terror and have no idea why. And it's the emotional charge from an event that happened many years ago. And so maybe you can tell us a bit more about the process that you use to help people release the emotional charge.
Right. Well, I have different approaches because everybody is on a different place in their journey. I have clients who don't even realize that I have been traumatized.
Right.
It usually comes out through the sessions, and then we can start working on it. But usually when I'm, let's say, gentle, getting to the subject, I start with life transformation coaching, which means we talk about obstacles they have in their lives, and we explore why this happens, how they can change their mindset so they get out of that life cycle and into hopefully a brighter future. And if they feel after a while that there is a reason they're feeling this way, and some bits and pieces of memory come up or some feelings, then we explore the possibility of trauma. Then we go more into somatic psychology. Now, somatic psychology is based on a belief that trauma affects not just the mind, but the whole body.
Right.
So, and it's a very spiritual approach. It basically combines the psychology with the spirituality. This is why somatic psychology really fascinates me. So I go with questions into that direction to help the client ease into looking at their trauma and what it was. And we slowly move forward and start to uncover things. And then we work through that. And if they feel they really want to release it, then I go into sessions of traumatic incident reduction, which is an evidence-based modality in the field of metapsychology. It is, in essence, a form of coaching, but it's a very strict way of coaching. You have a very strict agenda on how to move the client through their trauma. Basically, you help the client to look at a trauma over and over and over again until the emotional charge releases from the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Which means at the end of that, when we talk about the trauma, it feels the same way as if I would say green carpet.
Mm-hmm.
So it has no meaning whatsoever.
Yep.
Now, when I talk about my story, a lot of times I have to remind myself that's actually my story, because I have no emotional connections to it anymore at all.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's where I am always striving to get my clients to when they're ready.
Right. And so, do you ever use meditation to assist your clients, and meditation techniques to help de-energize the memories? Is that something that you do as well?
Yes, it all depends on the client, if the client is open to it. I love using visualizations and meditation so they can focus on something, what I'm asking them to focus on, and look at different things.
Yeah. Because I think you can get fast shifts as well. Because, I mean, you were talking about sort of gently, step by step, and, you know, evidence-based approach, very careful, step by step. But I think if somebody is ready to shift, you can also shift quite quickly.
That's true. When I say careful, I mean that I make sure my client is always in control.
Yes.
One thing, especially sexual assault survivors have not much of, is control, because
True.
they were not in control when they were assaulted.
Yeah.
So I make sure, I always ask my client, is this what you want to work on today? What would you like to do today? What do you want to look on today? I always make sure they know they're in control, so that they learn that they are capable of being in control of their own choices.
Right.
So that they don't look for me for guidance, but that they are telling me, they're guiding me and telling me. So this is what I mean with gentle. Yes, if someone says, no, just rip it out, I want to get rid of it, then we go directly into TIR and take care of it.
Right.
It's the most straightforward approach.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's evidence-based, it really works, and it's incredible.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I like your answer for that. That's kind of what I do too, is what they want to work on, and then respond to that.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's so important with trauma.
Because I mean, I know that I've, you know, I've met other people who've been frustrated with, I don't know, maybe psychologists that they've been to see, and they spend months and months and months and months, and they just feel like they're going back over and over again, shelling out more money for very little results, you know, until maybe they say, well, I'm going to leave you now. And then all of a sudden, you know, and so I think it is important to just work at the pace that the client, like you say, the pace that the client is, it wants to work at.
Right. I've had a lot of clients who came to me and said, well, my psychologist said that he worked with me for several years and we haven't gone anywhere. I should look help somewhere else because apparently he's not the right one for them. I hear that so many times. And I'm always saying, I may not be the right person to help the trauma victim, but what I do is not the only approach. There are so many different ways to heal trauma. We just have to look outside the box, because counseling may work for some, but not for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Do you get, I mean, here's the other thing, is that while you still have that emotional energy in your space, I mean, you've heard of the law of attraction, right? Which basically says whatever energy is in our energy field is what we bring, is what the universe basically delivers into our reality. And so you must get people who've just got this pattern of traumatic event after traumatic event after traumatic. Even your story, it's like once you anchor in a belief that says, that, you know, the people are abusive, people are mean, I'm a victim. Then another event happens and amplifies the belief, then another event happens and amplifies the belief, until you eventually do come to the point that you change that vibration in your energy field. I had another question, and it's really funny because, I found myself, when I talked about a few of my memories, I'm actually feeling quite angry about it, and I was like, why am I feeling angry? And I have another one actually with a dentist I used to go to who had this when I was a student, and he used to do this weird tongue massage and say, oh, this is this relaxation method that we dentists use. And it wasn't relaxing, it was disgusting and perverted, And so I've been asking myself, why am I feeling angry? And it's got something to do with they get away with it,
Yes.
So what should happen to the perpetrator? Whether it's a pervy dentist massaging your tongue, or the dirty old man that takes you into the shed on a what should happen to those people? And I guess in an enlightened society. So what's your perspective on that?
Well, if it would happen to me now, oh my goodness. I would make sure that this person gets what he would deserve. And back then, I remember when I was raped, that guy, he was a friend of mine, and I've known him for a few months, and he was in the US Army stationed in Germany. So I wanted to go to the military police and report him. And I talked to my father about that, and he looked at me and he said, it's going to be you against the US Army. Who do you think is going to win?
Yeah.
So I dropped it. I didn't go. But today I think, you know what? I was the victim. Why would the other one win? Why wouldn't I even get a chance to make my case?
Yeah.
But now I say, you know what? I healed. I forgave them for my sake, to move on, and karma will take care of it.
Yeah. And I mean, I suppose like a professional, like a doctor or they really should be struck off from that behavior, and then maybe assisted, with their own reasons that they've got that behavior.
Yes, they shouldn't be practicing.
No.
Which is one reason why honestly I would never go to a male psychologist, gynecologist, unless I really have to, because
neither would I.
It's not that I think all men are the same when they're gynecologists. No, I trust that they really like what they do for the medical reasons, but I wouldn't feel comfortable.
No. And I mean, from a spiritual perspective and an energetic perspective, and this probably will get some people riled up, but I don't believe that if you don't have the equipment, you can fully understand the equipment. And just right. Physically and energetically, because the female energy system is different than the male energy system.
Yes. That's true.
So, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you wish that I'd asked you that you'd like to share with the listeners? We're getting towards the end of the show.
I think I would like to talk a little bit about triggers. I was just writing a Facebook post today about being triggered by someone. And I think I would like to talk about this because everybody has that one person that triggers them, that yanks their chains.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's an important subject. Because let's say there's like a co-worker, and no matter what that person says or does, you're always triggered. You're clenching your teeth, you have knots in your stomach, and you don't get why you're the only one who reacts that way and everybody else doesn't care. So this is also caused by trauma.
Right.
Now, most people think that trauma is something huge, like sexual assault or an almost fatal car accident or anything else that's big, but trauma can be something small. It could be something like being disrespected in kindergarten by another friend who grabbed a toy and punched you in the face,
Yeah.
for example.
Yeah, or the example you gave earlier of somebody changing your nappy and having a good look at your genitals and not really, you know. Yeah.
Exactly. And then you feel a certain way, but you cannot articulate it as a child.
Mm-hmm.
Then a few years later, something similar happens that brings this feeling back up. And it continues over and over again as you get triggered. Now you're an adult and you already know this type of person that would behave in this way. And someone walks in with exactly this energy and you just go ballistic in your mind.
Yeah.
Because you're so triggered just by the person, the energy being in your energy field.
Yes, yeah.
And this all comes from a trauma in the childhood. So when we are triggered by someone, it's important to understand that this is just showing us something that needs to heal within ourselves.
Yeah.
It's not that person's fault.
I can think of another case like that. So your case is the case of, you know, the person that's triggering you is reminding you of the frequency,
Right.
perhaps of the abuser. But also, if you've been abused, and there's another person in your reality that's been abused, the mirroring can be so intense that you repel each other. Like you really can't bear that person because they're reflecting at you something that you're denying in yourself. You've both been abused. You're not ready to look at the abuse, and so you react to that person.
It's true. Having a general dislike for a person right from the start until you get to know them and you realize you have so much in common.
Right.
And then you end up being best friends.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, no, it's really interesting. You know, I have a story. When I used to work in the biotech industry, and there was one person that I worked with, and I couldn't stand them, just exactly like you're describing. And it was like, I don't get it. He's not really, I mean, I could see like he's not really doing anything, but I just can't bear to be in the same room as him. And my spiritual teacher at the time said, well, you've got so many, what we call in psychic speak, matching pictures. You know, he's just reflecting. So you just, and we have a method that I teach my clients for de-energizing and clearing the pictures, which is actually quite fast. And so I sat for an hour or two and just cleared my matching pictures. The next time I was in a room with that person, I quite liked him. And it was just amazing because, you know, I went from absolutely can't stand him to, oh no, he's quite a nice guy, you know. So, it's kind of interesting. It's not necessarily a permanent thing that you dislike someone. It's just based on what's going on energetically.
Exactly.
So how can our listeners get a hold of you? Where can they find out more about you? And if they want to approach you for some assistance working with trauma that they've experienced?
Okay. Well, first and foremost, you can find me through my website, which is riseaboveyourstory.com. Under the same name, I'm on Facebook.
Yeah.
And when I do start working with a client, I offer a free clarity session where I send out a questionnaire to get a basic idea of what's going on. And then we talk about it and I give them some tips what they can do for themselves to start working on their trauma healing, and then talk about how I can help them. And if they feel comfortable working with me, then we start our sessions, because trust is so important. If a person doesn't trust me, we can't work on their trauma.
No.
So.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. And thank you very much, Sandra, for being on the show today.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. And listeners, you've been listening to Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Lesley, and the guest this evening was Sandra Cooze. And we've been having a pretty intense, it's a very pleasant conversation on the surface, but I must say I'm feeling quite intense underneath the surface about this subject. So if that's you too, listeners, then you might want to look at that and maybe contact our guest. All right, so you've been listening to Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Lesley, and we're here every Tuesday evening from 7 to 8 p.m. Pacific time.
Thank you for joining us. You've been listening to another Unlocking Your Truth podcast by Dr. Lesley Phillips. For more information, go to our website at drlesleyphillips.com. That's drlesleyphillips.com, where you can ask questions or send her an email, and there's many free gifts on there for you as well. You can also find the questions that were asked during this show at the website on our free card reading podcast page, where you'll find a full list of them. Come back again.